Rolling.
Hi, I'm Ann Bogart. I'm one of the two co-directors of Radio Macbeth, and the other co-director is standing on the other side of the camera, looking into it right now as we're shooting. And this over here to my left, which is probably your right, is Will Bond.
Hi.
And this to my right and probably your left is Stephen Weber, who plays Macbeth. I said the word, and we're in a kind of sort of theater right now. And this, Will Bond plays many characters, and
among them Duncan,
yes,
and Macduff, and the Doctor, and then sundry other murderers and things.
And we are about to move into the Skirball Center and are excited to share this production with you. And in that spirit, we're going to talk about the production. And I have to say, J.M., who sent questions over from the Skirball for us, wrote gorgeous questions. Usually I ignore the questions that are sent to me, but these are so good, I'm going to refer to them because they're so good, and actually give a hard time to Will Bond and Stephen Weber, because they're such good questions, they're going to take some thinking. So I'm actually going to read the first question. I might deviate, but here we go. Talk us through the development of this new work. Where did you start? How long does it take? What are some of the things that can happen in the rehearsal room? How much of this process is the same from piece to piece? And what new elements did you bring to this work? How has it changed over time? That could take an hour. We're going to just see what... That's one question.
No,
that's the very first question. So I'm actually going to turn it on to Bondo.
Okay.
And Stephen, please interrupt any moment.
Well, the first thing I'll say is, according to this list of questions, this piece premiered in 2007. So it's not a new production, no. And it's a little bit difficult to remember how it all started. But I guess what I would... Is this post... Yeah, is this post the radio play?
Yes.
Yeah, so I will say this.
You have no memory,
I have
Bondo.
no memory of much of what we've done. But I will say that I was particularly, I know, Darren also, once we had built the War of the Worlds radio play, which was really just a kind of fun way to maybe try some ideas out for the larger War of the Worlds radio play about Orson Welles in the Mercury Theater. And then I believe we were so taken with this notion of a theater company working on a theater company, trying to figure out how to survive, etc. And then we thought, well, we should do a Shakespeare. And Orson Welles just happened to have an adaptation. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, I think so. But, and so it seemed like an obvious next step. So that there's a long journey with Welles and with the Mercury players, and yeah, I'll just toss it over from there.
And you got cast as Macbeth.
Yeah, well, I played Orson in the radio play, the first one we did.
Yeah.
And then in the big War of the Worlds play that we did at BAM. So I guess it made sense for me to keep going and do Orson in this one. Although, when we began this, for the first time, those first two were almost bio pieces about Welles or what he had done. And in this one we said, let's let that soften a little bit. Let's not point so hard at the Orson Welles part of it and say it's a theater company. We know it's inspired by the Mercury Theater on the Air and Orson and his friends who were working with him. But that the audience doesn't need to be fixated on that.
Yeah.
So, which was good because it allowed us to pull back from that impersonation a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, everyone who's listening, is what you get from the first question, which was much more complicated, but this is a good start. So, what was surprising about this particular process, or returning to this piece? What did you learn individually and as a company, both in the original and the revival? So we're in the midst of a revival, and it's really pretty much the same actors who keep returning to the same roles in this piece, which is wonderful. How does it feel to put on the clothes of Macbeth again, Stephen Weber?
Every time it feels scary and dangerous and difficult. So that's sort of what's underneath it. But there's also, and I don't know if you feel this, Bondo, but I think there's a huge amount of pleasure in letting go of some things because we know the material pretty well, even if we have to work hard to remember what chair goes where when. We know this material very, very well. And in that situation, an actor can relax a little bit and let some things go that maybe they've been holding on to and find some new things. And I think we have found things this week that are new. Little moments, and also relationships have changed. Because there's another layer that we haven't mentioned yet. Maybe it's coming up in one of these questions, but we're also telling the story of this theater company who's in rehearsal, and they have a history together and they have relationships. So we're trying to tell that story while we tell the Macbeth story and have them be on two simultaneous tracks and never let one drop.
Although, from my vantage point, watching, Macbeth, the play, wins. In other words, we start out as a bunch of actors together who are trying to rehearse a play, and you think, oh, that's okay, that's interesting, the language is interesting, and suddenly, wham, you're in the middle of the Scottish, what do they call them, the big fields out there in Scotland? Moors. We're in the middle of the Scottish moors, and in the middle of a bloody story, and one that's very human and with the most extraordinary language. So the power of that play, I think, wins and takes over from us. And I have to say, watching, I agree, I don't see that it becomes more easy, what you say, but I believe you. What I see is it becoming deeper and more meaningful as I'm watching. I mean, that play, Macbeth, is one of the most powerful jet streams I've ever encountered of a play. It just moves like a locomotive at top speed or fast train.
Especially with Orson's cut, because it is Orson Welles' cut of the text. And it is streamlined even from a typical cut of the play.
Bondo, how does it feel going back for you?
Just on that point, I mean, some of the way it's built is because it takes off so fast and there's a lot of information that needs to be covered. One of the pieces of the technology in performing it is like we have to pull on the reins a little bit so that it doesn't get ahead of us until it does, as you say. The play wins. The other thing is that something that you said early on in the, I think you and Darren collaborated on this idea, which is that the intention, the logic of how the staging works is to actually make the play audible. That was, as if you had closed your eyes in the audience and you were being told a scary ghost story.
Wasn't that true, Darren? The first rehearsal, we put some microphones in the middle of the room.
We did.
And everybody stood around it and said, imagine that you are now broadcasting this to the world, right?
Right, and anyone could walk to a mic at any time. They're all gathered together and just speak part of the play, and then somebody else would pick. That's right.
I forgot that.
So we experimented with that idea, and then when we expanded out and added furniture and chairs and more things, we had to figure out the logic of when to be on the mic, when not to be on the mic, and etc., in the service of keeping the language aloft.
So it's true, it's all coming back to me now. We wanted to make sure that if somebody's eyes were closed, that they would have an incredible journey. Or if somebody's ears were closed, they would have an incredible journey as well, a visual one. So that's what we're remembering as we speak here. We're remembering the origins. We're now going to go to this part that's about inspiration.
Okay.
So why Shakespeare? Which came first? Which came first, Wells or Shakespeare? I would say for us, although we have done Shakespeare before, this play, I would say what came first was Welles. As I think you mentioned earlier, we were working on a big play about the life of Orson Welles because we were interested in climbing onto the shoulders of a great American artist. And through that, we discovered his War of the Worlds, the radio play, which was done in 1938 and scared thousands of people out of their house because they thought that Martians were arriving. Oddly enough, if you're listening to this before the end of October, you can come and see that at the West Bank on 42nd Street in the little theater downstairs. We'll be doing a run of that. So you'll get to see Orson in many manifestations.
Yeah.
Anyway, what am I saying? This is about inspiration. Oh, so I answered that question.
Yeah.
How have you decided over the years which materials to work with?
Well, when you said American company, I just thought about a lot of the themes or personages we work on are American.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Andy Warhol or Robert Wilson or
Robert Rauschenberg, Joseph Cornell. They're all boys.
And you picked them mostly, right?
Yeah.
Virginia Woolf, not
did
American.
Not American, yeah, I know. I thought of her and I thought, she's not American.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, American themes, and we could talk about this play now in terms of its themes and in terms of the world we live in.
That's an upcoming question. Let's go there.
You want to go there?
Let's talk about doing it, because the last question, which comes later, is actually about doing this play after COVID. Not after. We're in an endemic called COVID.
It's not. I
It's
don't
not a
agree with this post-pandemic.
Well, it's not a pandemic anymore because we say it's not. That's
Yeah.
called doing things with word. It's now an endemic.
Is it?
We live with it like the flu. Anyway, post-pandemic, now endemic. How is
Yeah.
it to do this play? I'm curious. Do you have any thoughts, Stephen?
Based just on what we've been through with COVID-19?
Yeah. To make the question really hard.
That is hard. I don't know. I feel like the answer is, of course, yes, because everything is different in a way. Like, you approach everything differently having spent a year and a half or 2 years in your apartment or whatever. So yeah, definitely. And we're wearing masks in rehearsal. We're not wearing masks now. I hope I'm not giving you COVID-19 right now.
You just had it, so you can't.
Probably not.
Yeah.
But we're wearing masks in rehearsal, which is a big impediment, I have to say. It's really difficult to rehearse.
Can I tell you how much I miss your faces?
Yeah. But I don't know. That's a difficult question. How did COVID and the experience of it, the way it manifests in the U.S., change how I approach this material?
Yeah.
Do you have anything, Bondo?
I have one thing that's just creeping into my mind, which is it's often not about learning new things because of COVID, but now when I say, for example, Macduff, the character of Duff, and Malcolm and Ross, who is it?
Ross.
Go to England.
Oh.
And Macduff says at one point to Ross, "Stand Scotland where it did." And when I say that line, I think about just kind of being displaced.
Yeah.
Not knowing exactly where you are, and between walking around in the world now is still a little weird. Like, where am I exactly, and how do I behave when I'm there? It's a little chaotic. So finding one's footing, I think, is still
Interesting that you say that, because one of these questions coming up is about how we experience time differently.
Oh, interesting.
Not so much from COVID, but I would say from COVID, I experience time completely
Quite differently.
I don't even remember what pre-COVID was in terms of years at this point. You were going to say something.
And time actually is a word that comes up over. You say it. Time.
Macbeth is obsessed
time.
with time.
Today.
I was also thinking about autocracy, though, because
Yeah, that's the big one.
another thing that went along with the pandemic was an autocratic presidency that we, are living through this rise globally of autocracy, and the challenge to democratic liberalism. But and so you would think, this plays about a big autocrat who kills his way to the top and then tries to kill his way in staying there. Classic autocratic behavior. Somehow, I don't feel like our production changed to address that phenomenon in COVID. It's sort of like that phenomenon is universal and constant.
Yeah.
It can flare up and become worse. But and the other thing about it is that Shakespeare really wants the audience to identify with the autocrat and to care about what happens to him.
I love that you say that because you're playing the man.
Well,
You said that earlier in rehearsal. It's like,
It's
yeah,
true,
he's
though.
of all
Well,
the
you said it. You
Although-
said, we care so much about him. And I was like, yeah, well, Harold Bloom says he's the most sympathetic of all Shakespearean villains.
Yeah.
More than Iago.
It's true. It's true. But I just think it's funny anyway, in terms of as an actor.
Well, of course I want the
You want the
audience to
audience.
care.
And you have to. It's
Yeah,
your job.
what
as a
happens
matter of
to
fact.
me.
And I think you're succeeding
Yeah.
beautifully. So let's see. Time and legacy. How about this? These are great questions. Did restaging this piece make you think differently about the company legacy, especially while grappling with both Shakespeare and Wells? I have to say, because City Company is coming to this caesura in which it will become a different kind of organization, less of a producing organization, I see the actors, everybody in the room, really feeling it in rehearsal about what it means to be together in ways that are, as we say, reified. We use that word a lot in rehearsal, to make something new. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
That's a nicer way to put it, because, Ellen and I, like when we're on the medium tours and performances, after we close, we're always saying to each other, how many times do we have to say goodbye to each other this year? We got to say goodbye again? How many times? And actually, this is a nicer way to put it, which is, okay, now how are we meeting in the rehearsal today? How are we going to meet and carry on this process? That's more optimistic and positive and healthy, it seems like.
Absolutely, and actually that refers to a later question here that JM put, which is about training. And oh my goodness, Ellen Lauren has come, and she's going to join us. Come and join us, Ellen Lauren. We're in the middle of, it would be wonderful. And I think Ellen Lauren is just coming in from teaching at Juilliard, and I'm sure she'll have something to say. What was I talking about?
About meeting and saying goodbye and
I know, yeah.
legacy.
There's a question in this wonderful load of questions about training, about how training relates to what we do. And I just want to say that
you keep going. I'm getting a chair for Ellen. Here.
That as I watch the training in these particular days, I see that the training is really about practicing community.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer this wonderful question about, look, the women are on the inside. There we go. Ellen Lauren here, just in from teaching at Juilliard. We'll give you the next question. And that the training that we do is actually about taking care of and nurturing the community as it moves forward. That's what I see. Anyway, let's see. These are wonderful questions, and so we're actually using them. Here's a tough one for you, Ellen. You ready? JM made a quote, which is fantastic, which is, quote, "Plays are rituals within which dangerous and powerful things can happen." What kind of magic is happening for the actors and the audience in our process? Go!
Well, I think you're
So good.
always, it's wonderful, and I really agree with that.
Yeah.
And then to that magical, chemical, synergistic process, you're adding you. And what you're trying to create inside of that magic is you're trying to create work that cannot be replicated by anybody else other than you. So that the unique alchemy you're adding to it, the unique chemical to this elixir, taking that metaphor to the recipe, is really only you can contribute it. However, you can't make assumptions about what that is. In other words, for us, I think why we've trained is to access a truer sense of what that unique contribution is from the self, rather than an idea leading necessarily, that the idea, the image, the inner concentration towards the thing is able to be controlled and held and experienced through the body into this magical experience, and then what the audience sees is a result of that alchemy that can only happen in that one night at 8 or that 2 p.m. matinee. But it's all so unique, and there's nothing generic about a play because of the artists that come into it and the uniqueness of their contribution. Darren's contribution, just so unique to that artist. I think that's what you're trying to do.
And yet many people have played these roles over the years in this play.
Centuries.
Like Leon played Macbeth one time.
Centuries.
And, you know, almost all the roles have been played by another actor at some point and
Well,
just in our company.
Yeah, we do switch around. But also the history of people who played these roles is always, when you start to think about it, you can barely stand up straight, because to think of putting on the clothes that so many other actors over time have done. But I love the use of the word alchemy. And we were talking before, and I think it's worth repeating, what we hope for is that when you come to see the play, you see a group of actors who are, you know, flipping through the script. They're tired, maybe they want to go home, they're a little over it. And little by little, the alchemy of the play possesses them. And hopefully possesses the audience.
Yeah.
And we're all there together. We're not on Zoom screens. And that's the big thing. I think there's a really tough question here, which is...
And that's real. That's not something you act,
Yeah.
so the audience has that impression. The play really does work on us, and it really does possess you, and it really does overtake you, and then you've got your agreed upon constructs or container that you adhere to. But it does. This play is just like a great recipe.
But you have to...
It's unique to the
you have
group
to
doing
be,
it.
You have to be open to that alchemy. You can't just deliver what you've rehearsed somehow.
Right.
Yeah, I really question now doing these kind of plays with a system such as we have, where you come in, you meet one another at the meet and greet, you do a table read, and the next day you're up staging it. That, to me, I've had the great fortune, and also we've all worked so hard to do it a different way. I can't imagine doing a play such as this and launching that way.
Yeah.
And I have.
Yeah.
Believe me, I've done
You
it
have, yeah.
like that. But now it seems...
But what you're seeing in
have
front of
ways-
you here are 4 people who've worked together for 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really something. And you 2 have worked together even longer.
Even longer.
Yeah.
And to add a little bit more, I was thinking about it is a conjuring that's happening, and Darren with the sound is doing that. So not only are you representing, can one use that word?
Still.
Macbeth or Lady Macbeth or Macduff or something. Not only are you doing that, but there's also the shared agreement that we're going to do what we can to keep the conjuring going. So if it means I just have to suddenly snatch a mic and pull it in front of you, and you start talking and you're like, oh, I guess I'll put on the fur. And, you know, there is a reality that has a performance level to it, but there's also the reality of we're actually task-orientedly doing things to keep that ghost story going that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And then that becomes part of the performance.
That's so interesting, though. You just made me think
And
about
that keeps
ritual.
us together as performers.
Ritual in a different sense. You know what they say about rituals? You have to do it in the right order, or nothing will work
It's
right.
really
And I
important.
watch Kelly Marr rehearsing, who's obsessed with getting everything in the right order and quarter of an inch this way. And she's basically trying to set up the conditions for alchemy. So her work in rehearsal is to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And so that's important, and we spend a lot of time doing that, but in service of what is the question, is the magic or
Right.
something. And now I'm going to switch to the hardest question ever, and I
Oh.
bet I'm going to ask it, and there's going to be a silence. We're going to be
Oh.
going on for here.
And then 3 of us will leave.
This
It's
one's
not
tough.
peace in the Middle East or climate change, is it?
It's neither of them. It might be even
Harder.
harder.
Oh.
And we're going to go on for 5 more minutes, and then
Okay.
that's it. So, okay, ready? This is tough. What do you think artists' responsibilities are to the world, directly or indirectly? I throw that gauntlet down to you.
Us? Well, you've written several books about that.
I'll shut up.
Well, one thing I think, the first thing that pops to mind, I'll just venture in, is to open or offer an alternative way of looking at something,
Yeah.
viewing something, or thinking about something.
Yeah. And I would add to that an alternate way of being together. That we propose on the stage, the way the acting company is together, is our group presentation, designers, directors, staff, of how we might function in the world together better. It's a proposal.
So it's not an answer.
It's not an answer, it's a problem.
Our, directly or indirectly, is to access the fantastical and learn to be in it and grapple with it and forefront it, as opposed to solving the daily life. That is really, really important to keep that awake, alive, viable in the world. As we're saying the same thing, alternative ways of looking at things, but there's also this, which walking down the street you can see in a city like New York, but generally we all try to keep the fantastical pretty much tamped down so we can function and keep things moving. But it doesn't mean it's not roaring there. I mean, novelists do it, painters do it, and we do it in a really extraordinary three-dimensional way and collaborative way, which makes what we do incredibly vital in the room. Like a little. You've said this, right? The campfire in the desert, and lighting the campfire to draw people for warmth for a moment, and then people have to go on and find the next campfire.
But I was just thinking of you, Ellen, playing Dionysus. I'm thinking of this play in general, what I've been watching in the rehearsal room, and a term that I've never used out loud, I'm about to use, because I've heard people use it, but I suddenly like it, which is a wilding, is accessing the wild in us. And you were saying fantastical, and I was thinking, in a sense, how necessary it is to access the wild in our souls. And I, as a director, and I don't know how Darren feels about it, because he's functioning on a very different level, which is he's making everything work basically at this point. But as a director, I get access to that wilding, and so I'm thinking I'm the first audience. So I get access to that wildness through you, watching what you're doing. Watching Kelly today play the witch, I thought I had to leave the room.
That's accessing fantastical
Oh my
energy.
God, she,
Magical.
you say Kelly Maher is, you'd say she's very conservative in her life, but man, she plays the witches, and suddenly she blows the room down. The walls are coming down. Where did that come from? But that's our job, in a sense, is to access that wildness.
I don't know, though. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, does an artist have any responsibility? I mean, all the things you mentioned are possible.
Yeah.
But that isn't the same as saying those are required to be an artist. And I'm sitting here thinking, maybe there's no responsibility. Maybe an artist only has a responsibility to follow their own interest or their own inquiry. And sometimes it may lead down these avenues and be wonderful, but sometimes not. And is that, and I don't know, I'm thinking, is that wrong? Is it wrong to say an artist has no responsibility inherently to a community?
Well, that's kind of part of the job, right? Is to go outside the lines. Meaning, you have a lot of responsibilities in your life to taking care, to survival, taking care of others around you. But
hopefully,
as an artist, maybe you don't. No, that's it. That's it.
What was
Bondo.
the question? Does it say responsibility?
Oh, yeah, it's
or-
this one right here.
Cool.
Read it out loud, Bondo, and then we're going to end.
it's a good question.
It's a great. These all these
Great.
questions are.
Oh,
great.
what do you think artists' responsibilities
Yeah.
are to the world? I see.
Yeah. Very good.
to be
Well,
good people.
let's end on that question. What do you think the artist's responsibility is in the world? We've left it wide open, which is our job. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.